my mother thought I would be dead by the age of 5. But it was cognitive. It was part of my brain. Sleep deprivation, chronic sleep deprivation can have a negative impact. So actually, it's neuroplasticity, but it's in the direction that we don't want to go. If you think of your hand, in the palm of your hand is a concept or an idea, and the fingers are elements that are necessary to interconnect to build that concept. And you have that, that aha moment, like they all come together and you get it, right?
Welcome to a new episode of the Engineered Mind podcast, where we explore the exciting world of science, productivity, and solopreneurship, and how it's changing the way we live and work. In this episode, I'm excited to have Barbara Young as a guest, who has been utilizing the principles of neuroplasticity since 1978, and her work has grown out of her own journey to transform her own brain. She's the founder of the Arrowsmith Program, an assessment process and suite of cognitive exercises designed to stimulate and strengthen areas of cognitive functioning that underlie a range of learning difficulties. Her work is recognized as one of the first examples of the practical application of neuroplasticity to address learning difficulties, and its application has expanded to address those dealing with traumatic brain injury, addiction, cognitive decline with aging, and those who want to enhance performance. Barbara is the recipient of the Leaders and Legends Innovation Award from the University of Toronto for her contribution to education. Support the podcast by rating it on a favorite platform of your choice to make sure more inquisitive people around the world engineer their minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. And now, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy my podcast with Barbara Young to learn more about the fascinating world of neuroplasticity and its potential to change lives. Hey Barbara, thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Today we'll talk about the fascinating phenomenon of neuroplasticity, but also how we can address our own learning difficulties. And definitely, Barbara, we'll talk about your journey as well, your childhood, and how you have actually overcome or actually trained your brain to make use of that neuroplasticity. But before we jump into that, maybe we jump straight into the nitty-gritty. What is neuroplasticity in the first place?
So it's really actually quite a simple concept. It just means that our brain is capable of change. We used to believe our brain was fixed. The brain that we were born with was the brain that we were going to end our life with. And now we know that's not the case. We know that our brain is incredibly capable of change. So it can do things like increase the number of dendrites on neurons, which makes more synaptic connections for better neurotransmission. We can increase neurotransmitters, glia cells, enlarge the size of capillaries, so more blood flowing to the brain. And actually, we know now we can actually grow new neurons, this concept of neurogenesis. And it makes sense if we think about, evolution and that we need to respond to our environment, that our brain wouldn't be fixed. So with enrichment and stimulation, we can actually change our brain physiologically and functionally, which then impacts our ability to learn, our ability to engage with other people, our ability, to function in the world. And one thing that's important to understand about neuroplasticity also is it's really a neutral concept. So it means our brain can change. It can change in positive ways with, good stimulation, and it can also change in negative ways. So we know things like, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, chronic sleep deprivation can have a negative impact. So actually, it's neuroplasticity, but it's in the direction that we don't want to go. So I always say, it's important to keep your brain healthy. And also, if your body's healthy, most of those factors are moving your brain in a positive direction. So to me, it's really promising. When I grew up, the belief was the brain was fixed. So if you had a learning difficulty, there was nothing you could do about it. And now we know that's not the case. I mean, I think the brain is this incredible, amazing organ that we have, that we carry with us everywhere we go. And it really shapes who we are. And with neuroplasticity, not only does our brain shape us, but we can shape our brain. So very promising.
Yeah, very interesting. Before we jump to the time of the unchangeable brain, as you call it, to 1957, and you'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few seconds. Do you think it's a misconception that we think that newborns have this very much the capability of changing their own brains and learning very quickly and learning everything. But then as we get older, we believe that our brain is kind of fixed. We have that fixed mindset rather than the growth mindset. Do you think that's a misconception?
I do think it's a misconception. I mean, we know, a baby has lots to learn, right? So the brain is, there are a lot more nerve cells, neurons in the brain, at that point than they're going to be later in life. But it's just then a process of refinement, kind of pruning out what isn't necessary and keeping and developing what is necessary. I've worked with individuals as young as 5 and as old as 95. And to me, again, what's so exciting is we're seeing neuroplasticity across the lifespan. So maybe we have a belief system that says, oh, we're not as capable of change. But certainly in my work, I haven't seen that. I've seen, a 75-year-old make the same progress as a 12-year-old. So as I'm getting older, it's very hopeful. And and it makes sense. Our brain is designed to be adaptable, to be responsive to change, and that occurs across our lifespan. So it's never too late. If somebody wants to enhance or strengthen part of their cognitive functioning, as I said, we work with people of all ages.
Yeah, I believe some of your teachers said, when we go back to the point that I mentioned in 1957, basically living with your limitations that you have in your brain. Do you believe that limitation is a genetic cause, or do you think it's because of your environment that you were growing up in? What do you think that's the cause?
Yeah, I think probably in my case, it was genetic. I mean, if I look at my family, my father had a couple of areas that he struggled with, and my mother had some areas that she struggled with. I mean, nothing that massively impacted them, but then I got the combination from both. So, and if I I have 4 brothers, and each of them maybe had a small piece, but I got all the pieces, which just, is just the luck of the draw. And yeah, so I think in my case, but we see students where it can be a combination of environmental or genetic. And then in some cases, we can't trace it anywhere. I mean, again, the brain is incredibly complex. So things can happen that we don't yet understand. But as I said, in my case, I can pinpoint, each of the learning difficulties that I got through my parents and through my family line.
Yeah. How was it for you in your childhood? Because you must have thought, because all the other kids might have learned something very quickly for them. It was easy to grasp, for example, a concept or, for example, reading a book. How was it for you? Like, how did you think you were different? You probably would have thought something is wrong with me. How can I change that? How can I fix that?
Yeah, I definitely felt something was wrong with me, because I could look around and see my classmates who were able to do things relatively easily that for me, it took incredible effort. And sometimes even with that incredible effort, didn't matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do it. So at the first level, nobody had to tell me anything. I just had to observe. And then my teacher in grade 1, I overheard her talking to my mother saying that I had a mental block. Because at that time, as you noted, in the 1950s, there wasn't even a concept of a learning difficulty or a learning disability. So being quite literal, I actually thought I had a piece of wood, like a cube in my head that made learning difficult. And as I got older, I realized, no, I don't have a piece of wood in my head, but I did have blockages. I had parts of my brain that weren't working properly. But I feel, in grade 1, I was given a life sentence. That teacher told my mother that all of my education would be a struggle. And she also said that, don't have high expectations for your daughter because, she's not going to amount to much. And I did not enjoy school. I try to think back. Was there a day that I can remember that I was excited about going to school? Nothing really comes to mind because it was always a struggle. It felt like I had to put in so much more effort to learn. And my mother was an educator, and she decided in grade 1, when she heard my teacher's pronouncement, that I was going to learn to read, I was going to learn to write, I was going to learn to deal with numbers. So I would come home at lunch, and my mother would have, flashcards that you hold up with letters and numbers. And then I'd come home after school, and I'd have the flashcards. And I joke that I became a workaholic in grade 1. And it's what it took just to pass grade 1. So eventually I did learn how to read and to write and to do basic numbers, but it didn't address the underlying learning difficulty. So that learning difficulty followed me through school. And in a sense, my grade 1 teacher was right about all of my education was going to be a struggle. And it was. So it was not a happy time going through school. And because of the nature of the learning difficulties I had multiple problems. So I struggled understanding concepts, comprehension. I struggled understanding kind of logic, like what's critical for engineers, like that reasoning process. And then I wasn't good in sports. I was uncoordinated. I had a part of my brain that tells half of my body where it is in space, and it wasn't very good. So I would bump into things, bang into things. And then I had a spatial difficulty. So I didn't understand, if a ball was being thrown at me, sort of where I was in relationship to that ball and how I could reach out to catch that ball. So I wasn't good in sports. So, I didn't have that avenue. I wasn't really good academically. And socially, I struggled to understand people because I didn't really comprehend. So if somebody asked me a question or said something to me, I really wasn't sure what they meant. So there was really no area that I excelled, because sometimes a student might not be good academically, but they're good socially, or they might not be good socially, but they're good in sports. I was equally bad in everything. So it was really not a happy time.
Yeah. Maybe for parents listening to this podcast, or maybe some parents listen to this and think, how can I actually train my kid if I feel they have a learning disability? What can they do?
Yeah. So I think that the first level is really listen. Certainly what I see, and I've worked with lots of parents and lots of students, and I travel around the world because my program is in, I think, 13 countries in 100 schools, is listen to your child, right? It's really, really important at the first step, because often we want to sort of paper over a difficulty, like, because it is painful, right, to see your child struggle. So often the first thing that a parent will do is say, "Oh, you're amazing, you're wonderful," which is great, but it then negates the child's experience. Like, my parents told me I was wonderful and great, but every day I walked into that classroom and that wasn't my experience. And it would have been wonderful to have somebody that would just listen and validate the struggles that I was having. So I think that's really important, is to deeply listen to one's child and really understand their struggles, and then be an ally with them, right? Like, say, hey, you don't have to solve this on your own. We're going to work together. And then, the approach that we take in my work is, once we understand what cognitive function is causing the problem, we have an assessment process, and it can be done. One of the things that COVID did is accelerated our going online, right? I mean, we still have in-person programs, but we can also now do our assessment online. We also have a questionnaire on our website that's free, that a parent can do for their child, and it will identify what areas are causing difficulty based on their responses. Because the first level is have insight and understand the nature of the problem. And then the next level is working that part of the brain to strengthen it. And again, we can do those now online from anywhere in the world. And what we see, as the cognitive function strengthens, all of the learning difficulties fall away, because the source of the problem is, as it was with me, is part of the brain that's just underperforming. It's maybe got fewer connections. The connections just aren't as strong. And we've done imaging research looking at students as they go through the program. And what we see is those weak areas start to strengthen in their connectivity. And then the student can process, they can think, they can problem solve, they can remember, they can hold visual symbol patterns, which are critical for reading. So whatever the area is, we can strengthen it so the learning just goes forward. So we don't teach content. So we're not teaching the child how to read. We're not teaching the child how to write. We're changing the brain's capability and capacity to learn how to read and learn how to write.
Yeah. So as you said, I think you said you're around 100 schools right now. Do you think there's a fundamental flaw in the educational system? And do you believe there must be a change in order to, for example, sometimes when kids are in school, they feel they are an outsider, they don't have straight A's, they feel they don't think enough outside the box. Like, what can we do to encourage kids to become better in school, or maybe even students inside of university? What can they do to enhance their brain capabilities?
Yeah. Well, again, my vision is to put cognitive exercises right in the student's day as part of their curriculum. I mean, we go to school to learn. We learn with our brain. So why not put the brain in the education equation? To me, it just seems sort of obvious. And there's some schools now. There's one in Spain and Madrid, one in Wellington and New Zealand, some in the United States and Canada that are doing that, right? They're following that model. And that's really my vision, that, a child goes to school, they're learning curriculum, but at the same time, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, they're doing a cognitive program that's stimulating their brain. And I've designed a system where each grade they're doing a different cognitive program. So in grade 1, they'd be working on the part of the brain that's involved in motor planning, which is critical for writing, critical for eye tracking and reading. So it's appropriate because in grade 1, you're learning to write, you're learning to read. And then grade 2, we work on the visual memory function, which is critical, again, for reading, to hold the visual pattern of words. It's critical for spelling. Then grade 3, we work on numeracy, the part of the brain that holds numbers, understands numbers. Grade 4, reasoning. So we have a whole system. And we've done research in the University in Madrid showing the benefits, like the processing speed improves, attention improves, and that's not a big cost, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week to enhance the student's abilities to learn, because it's our brain. That's what we learn with. And if we enhance it as we're learning, it accelerates the speed at which an individual can learn. So I think, the future of education is putting cognitive programs right into the school system, so it's a normal part of a student's day. And that's what I would argue is where we need to go. And what that would do is every student would benefit, whether they have a learning difficulty or not, because we all have a brain and we can enhance it. And then the students that do have learning difficulties would benefit. And then there'd be no stigma, because there is still a stigma associated with having a learning difficulty. People are looked at differently if they, state that they have a learning difficulty. So if every child in the classroom is working on improving their brain, it's just normalized, right? So nobody is different. Everybody is doing that. So I think that's really, really important. And then you mentioned growth mindset, helping students learn about growth mindset, that positive attitude towards learning, even mindfulness, which reduces anxiety, because we know anxiety impacts negatively neuroplasticity and learning. So there are a number of things that can be done, cognitive programming, growth mindset reduction, anything that will reduce anxiety. And I think, the World Economic Forum has looked at what are the skills that students of today are going to need later in the 21st century, because we know the world is changing very rapidly, and we don't necessarily know what are the skill set that somebody starting in grade 1 today is going to need, once they get out into the workforce. And so they've identified, thinking, critical thinking, reasoning, empathy, a number of skills that they think are critical. And if I look at those skills, underlying all of them is our brain. So rather than just teaching those skills, let's change the brain to be able to live those skills. And I think it's critical because there's more and more uncertainty in our world. And the better we can handle uncertainty, the better we can process information, the better that we can perspective take, that I can put myself in your shoes to try to understand your experience, the better I can reason, the better I'm going to handle that uncertainty and maybe help solve some of the problems that we have in the world. And that's our brain. That is fundamentally, our brain's job to do all those things. So to me, it's really promising, and I think that's where we need to go. Is I say put the brain in the education equation.
Mm-hmm. Really fascinating, Barbara. I was wondering, in terms of age, would you say the earlier you identify this learning disability, the easier it is to basically fix it? Because when I think about elderly people, they might have this cognitive decline maybe. Do you think from a science perspective, it's easier to teach kids to actually fix that learning disability rather than of an old person?
It's a really interesting question. When I started this work, I would have answered yes. Yes, I thought the earlier, the better. I'm not seeing that in my work, which is really surprising. And I've been doing this work for 40 plus years. I think there's different challenges at different ages. And I think there's good reason to try to address these as early as possible, because what we see with students, young adults that have learning difficulties that haven't been addressed, they've developed a lot of emotional overlay. So feeling depressed, not feeling good about themselves, anxiety. So if we can address it earlier, we can remove those factors from the equation. But in terms of rate of progress, I have not seen a difference, across the ages. Sometimes with adolescents, there's more resistance because they've had more time with their struggles, and they maybe have tried other things that haven't helped. So they think, why am I going to try something else? But they're all more extraneous factors that then, we have to deal with and work with to get the person to access the program. But yeah, I'm really, really encouraged that we're not seeing those differences, but we do see variability in plasticity. And that's something that fascinates me. So I've seen two students exactly the same age, doing the same amount of work, having a very similar profile of strengths and weaknesses. And they both make progress, but one goes 4 times faster than the other. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing that I can point to that should explain that difference, that, anything that I can observe. And I believe, and there's research to suggest that, just like there's variability in everything, there must be variability in plasticity. There are probably, different genes, genetic factors that we don't understand today. And we did some research at the University of British Columbia. And again, we saw a group that we called super responders that just moved more quickly. And again, we don't know why. And that to me is really fascinating if we could understand why. The good news is the other group also made progress, and they made really good progress. It was just slower than the what we called the super responders. So I think that's more of a factor than age in terms of, response to the work.
Yeah. Does it have something maybe to do with the right and left hemisphere and how they are connected and how well they are communicating?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. We don't know. I mean, one of the thoughts was maybe myelin, that maybe those super responders had more myelin, which, is the superhighways, the conductors in the brain. But we don't know. We don't have enough research. Okay. So, if one of my fantasies or dreams would be to set up a research institute and work with researchers around the world. I mean, we have we work with researchers in the United States, in Spain, in Canada, but I would love to work with researchers and really look at a bunch of these questions and to understand how can we best help individuals, that are struggling, whether with learning difficulties, which is where my work started, but we're just starting a study at Harvard, looking at people with acquired brain injury, because we've done a study in Canada showing the benefits. Because again, if we can stimulate the part of the brain where there's been damage and improve its functioning, we can have a significant impact on the lives of people with acquired brain injury. There's a small study going on now, I think it's in Canada, looking at long haul COVID and the cases where there's been a cognitive impact, which we know COVID can do that, and seeing significant improvements in cognition. We're doing a study in Australia, in Toowoomba in Queensland, where we're working with people who struggle with addiction, so drug addiction, alcohol addiction. And these are young adults, and they're in a program, a rehabilitation program, to support their healing process. And they're doing one of my cognitive exercises, which affects sort of executive control, like thinking, reasoning. It impacts the ability to have insight, because it makes connections, and we're seeing significant improvement there. So there's huge application for this work. I mean, one of my colleagues said, if you have a brain, you can improve it, and if you have a problem as a result of something that's going on in your brain, we can do something about it. Again, with the caveat that there are some conditions that we don't fully understand. So until we understand the mechanisms, it's I don't want to say we can improve those, but a really broad range of difficulties. And you mentioned cognitive decline. We've worked with individuals in their 80s, professionals who just feel like they're not as sharp as they were, 10, 20 years before. And again, we see really good progress, right? That their processing speed picks up, their memory picks up, they can remember where they left their keys. So to me, I love my work because I feel like I get to explore new frontiers and contribute to, in a sense, like human evolution, understanding the brain, because it is a really, I don't know whether like the Star Trek, The Last Frontier, is a really interesting frontier that we're understanding more and more about, and its role in health and well-being.
Yeah, very interesting. I would have a follow-up question, because you mentioned addiction. Especially in the modern era, how much do you think social media plays a role in neuroplasticity? Is it hindering neuroplasticity? And also a follow-up question to that would be, we all know or hear about this this amazing AI tool, ChatGPT. Do you feel that people with a learning disability maybe can use an AI tool to basically, AI plus human gives us the best results, maybe help people with AI to enhance their learning capabilities?
Yeah, so the first one I'll answer, the social media piece. It's interesting. When I first started this work, there wasn't a lot of social media, like back in the late 70s and the 80s. Well, we didn't really have it. We sort of barely had computers. And I was reading Luria, who's the brilliant Russian neuropsychologist that gave me my first insight into the brain and my difficulties. And he'd written a chapter on the prefrontal cortex, like the frontal lobes, and which are fascinating. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to see people with this difficulty, because I didn't have that difficulty, and it was so fascinating to me. And probably over the course of the next 10 years, maybe I saw a dozen people with that difficulty, but not a huge number. I'd say now, maybe 60 to 70% of the individuals that we work with have executive function, prefrontal cortex difficulties. And I think what happened over that time, and I don't want to just blame social media, I think a number of things happened, but we kind of dumbed down education in a way. We made things simpler, like kind of sound bites, pre-digested, and that prefrontal cortex likes to dig into things. It's very active. It's mental initiative. It's, you want to go out and play and you need to invent a game, with your friends, that drives the prefrontal cortex. Whereas if everything is given to you, it's not really getting its stimulation, and it continues to develop throughout our lifespan, right? So if it's not being stimulated, it's going to not grow and develop in the way that it should. So that's my hypothesis. Do I know for 100%? I don't. But it makes sense. Like, why am I seeing so many more students coming with, trouble digging into things, thinking, problem solving? I call it hitting the wall. Like they hit a wall and they can't figure out, how can I get around that wall? Can I climb over it? Can I go under it? Can I, blast it? Can I find an end to it? Which is that active problem solving. Like, well, you must know in your field, you have a problem to solve and you probably, think of multiple different ways. And then, based on trying things, feedback, you refine until you find probably the most effective solution out of all of the solutions. And because that part of the brain is not really stimulated through social media, I think we're seeing more difficulties. I mean, the good news is we can strengthen it through, the work that I do and strengthen it so it is functioning. But I do think that social media, sound bites, simplifying things, not expecting students to reach and to, really to be confronted with the problem and have to solve it, right? Rather than also somebody running in and solving it for them, has done a disservice to our youth. So that's what I think we're seeing in my work. And then in terms of AI, I am not as familiar with. I know I've read the headlines, but I haven't really gone in and looked at that. And maybe it could be a support, like in my field, they're what I call compensations or workarounds or supports if you have a learning difficulty. So they're like tools. So if you struggle with writing, you can use voice recognition software, and it, you speak and it will translate that into text. If you have trouble reading, you can use a OCR, like a reader, right, that will read the words to you. I have trouble with auditory memory. You can record something and play it over several times. And those are all beneficial, but they're not strengthening the problem to overcome it. Like they're compensations. And so maybe AI could be a good compensation, but then it would mean that individual have to use that for the rest of their life, right? Whereas if we can actually stimulate and strengthen the part of the brain that is the source of the problem, then it's gone. It's then the brain is doing what it's designed to do for the rest of its life. And we know the brain works in neural networks, right? Like, so we're solving a problem, multiple areas come together in a neural network to address that problem. And then we're having to do a different kind of problem, and different combinations of brain areas come together in another neural network to do that work. And if there's any areas that are underperforming or underfunctioning, it's going to slow down that neural network. And compensations, can help with that, but they aren't going to really speed up the processing. You strengthen the cognitive function. Now those areas are working efficiently within the neural network and can go out and learn, and they're not being a drag or slowing down. And what we see in our work over and over again is often an increase in creativity, because if there are underfunctioning areas in the brain, what the brain does is it takes your strengths and sort of hyperconnects them to try to compensate for your difficulties. So what it means is you have these areas working really, really hard to try to do something that they're not designed to do, because they can't really do the job of those underconnected areas because they weren't designed to do that. So you have a brain that's working really, really hard, which is what happens with a student with a learning difficulty, but not really efficiently. And so as we strengthen the underconnected areas, those hyperconnected areas can not have to work so hard to try to do something they shouldn't be doing, but they can now do the things they're designed to do. And we often see an explosion in creativity because that energy is now freed up in the brain to do all of the things it's designed to do. I mean, we have students that start to write poetry, music, art. It's we had one student that came second in the world designing a racing car, and it was because he had these strengths, but because of his learning difficulties, he couldn't use them because they were being used and drained in not the way they were designed. So, I think, incredible possibility to kind of open human potential.
Yeah, definitely. And as we talked about neural networks, Barbara, I would be interested in what you think about this artificial intelligence kind of artificially tries to make our natural intelligence. How much do you think we know about the brain, and how much do you think AI can really replicate our human capabilities? Because I feel, I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but I'm just an engineer, but it feels like having that brain, that small brain in our head, and has so much power with 200 billion neurons, is, I think, truly fascinating. Do you think we'll at some point really reach the capabilities of natural intelligence? Because I believe it takes us a few hundred years to actually get there. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not sure whether we can. I mean, I'd like to optimistically hope maybe we could, but I just don't. I think the brain is so incredibly complex, right? And it's not linear, right? And it's there are parts of the brain that like do really fast simultaneous processing, right? Like the difficulty I had. It's sort of like if you think of your hand, in the palm of your hand is a concept or an idea, and the fingers are elements that are necessary to interconnect to build that concept. And you have that, that aha moment, like they all come together and you get it, right? And that's just one small aspect of the brain. And then the executive functioning, like the prefrontal cortex that drives, to come to solution. My first thought is, I don't know that we're in our lifetime going to see this, and whether it's even possible. I mean, there's so many things. I don't want to say something's impossible because there's so many things that we thought were impossible that have happened. I think it's incredibly, incredibly challenging. I just there's, as you said, there's so much that we still don't understand about the brain, but I don't see that the brain works like a computer, right? And in AI, it sees patterns, right? It sees patterns and interprets things from patterns, where our brain is much more complex than just a pattern recognition organ. So I don't know.
Definitely, yeah. Interesting insights. As we talked about the prefrontal cortex, I was wondering, isn't that a bit like contradictory? Because in school we are always taught, like, don't make the mistake again. They basically discourage you to make mistakes and always showing you with a red pen, this is a mistake, but they don't, or they almost never show you what you did right. Do you feel this is also a flaw in the educational system? And rather than saying, make a mistake and encourage you to actually make mistakes and iteratively become better at something, but we don't actually do that or teach that to children in school?
I think that's a really, really important idea, right? I think, yes. I rarely am in at my school here in Toronto since COVID, because I work from home and I have a team. But I went in on Friday for a meeting, and I love talking to the children, right? Like to the students, because they're just amazing. And we talked about exactly that concept about, that I talked about science, and that, they asked, in my work, did I ever invent something that, didn't really work? And I said, absolutely. Like many things ended up in the garbage pail. And I said, this is part of the learning process. Like you try something, you have a hypothesis or an idea, you try it and you learn from it. And if it doesn't work, then you maybe learn, okay, maybe I have to change this or change that, or maybe I have to throw everything out. My concept is flawed. I think it's really, really important in education that we do this and help, absolutely, like think through is the learning process. I mean, I don't know a human being that doesn't make mistakes, right? But we don't help students understand the importance of that and how we can learn from that. And that's the prefrontal cortex, that it allows us to try something, take in all the feedback, and then modify, and then try again. So, and maybe that's another reason why our prefrontal cortex isn't doing as well in the individuals that I see. But it's I think there are a number of things that are not right in our society, and maybe that's one. And there's definitely discovery learning. I mean, there are schools that I go to see as I travel around the world that have incorporated that into their system, and it's a joy to behold. Right, you see these students so excited about learning, because it's okay to make a mistake and to learn from the mistake, and there's value in that. Whereas if you go into school and think, you're going to get punished for making a mistake, you don't really want to try. I have my notebooks from, I think it was grade 3. Oh my gosh, like everything was red, right? Red, a few check marks. But then, the teacher, her comment, Barbara should just pay more attention. Barbara should try harder. Well, I was trying really, really hard, to get those X's. It's just, there's a lot that we know is important to put into education that slowly is getting into education, but we have a long way to go. So I think exactly what you're saying, like that's part of the growth mindset idea, and we certainly teach growth mindset in our work. And in some of our research, we saw students developed a growth mindset as they went through the program, because you can't be in a program where you're fundamentally changing your brain and not have a growth mindset, right? Like it's just something that gets developed because you're seeing through your efforts, you're seeing the cognitive change. I mean, it's so rewarding as the students at a certain point, is like the blinders come off, right? They can do things now that they couldn't do before, and that's what's incredibly motivating. Like, it was for me, where at a certain point in one of the exercises, it was like, I knew there was human neuroplasticity, because with the best will in the world, I couldn't do these things after this point in the exercise. They were just normal. They would just happen. I could do them, right? Like, so to me, the power of our brain, it's really, really remarkable.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like as a parent, maybe in school, we should incorporate more coding lessons? Because it feels coding forces you to make mistakes, because nobody writes code like the first time and gets it right. Do you see that something that more schools incorporate in their curriculum, like coding in general?
I think it'd be great. Anything that helps students experience that process, and definitely I know here in Canada, in some schools, there has been a movement to incorporate coding in. I work with software developers, to develop the platform for the work so it can go out into the world, and they've helped incorporate that. So I think absolutely any vehicle or mechanism that can support students in that iterative process, towards solution, is really, really critical, and it's good for life. I mean, even in social relationships, right? Because I mean, we make, nobody's perfect in their social relations. Like we make mistakes, and to recognize this is part of the human condition. This is how we grow and develop. And even in a corporation or a company, we came up with a solution for a problem that we had, and a few people said, "Whoa, we don't think this is the best solution," right? And it was a really great process, right? And then they said, "Oh, how can we make this better next time?" And I said, "I guarantee you, we're going to make other mistakes. But what is really good here is we have the process for all of us to have a voice and learn from each other and come to, at that moment in time, the best solution," right? Like it's this idea that you have to get it right immediately, which is a fallacy, and it's impossible. And then it shuts down growth, it shuts down learning. So,
Barbara, I would be interested in one more thing, and then I think we can wrap it up.
Sure.
I think we haven't talked about the somatosensory cortex, basically the part of the brain that registers sensation. How did you train the how do you call it, the emotional part of your brain. Is there a way to train that?
Yeah, well, the somatosensory cortex is just knowing where your body is in space through sensory feedback. So it's not really emotional.
Okay.
So that was the one where I was really uncoordinated, right? And so I would bang into things. I didn't know where the left side of my body was in space because part of in the right hemisphere, the somatosensory cortex, which maps sensation onto parts of your body, and then as you're moving your body, it gives the feedback to the brain and to the muscles as to how far they've moved. So I would like move too far or not far enough, or it also regulates pressure. So if I pick something up, I might put too much pressure on it and kind of break it, or not put enough pressure on it and it would fall. So it doesn't really affect you in school. I mean, definitely affects in sports, but definitely clumsy. I had tons of accidents, right? Like I have a scar up here where I ran into a car. I fell off the wrong end of a diving board. My mother thought I would be dead by the age of 5. But it was cognitive. It was part of my brain. I would put my hand on a hot burner on the stove, and if I wasn't looking, I registered pain, but my brain didn't tell me where the pain was coming from. So most people, immediately the brain sends a signal to your hand and you move your hand off the burner. Well, my brain didn't do that. So I learned that I had to watch that side of my body. So I created an exercise and it was with my eyes closed because to train that part of the brain, it had to go through sensory feedback. And if I had my eyes open, I would be using my eyes as a compensation. So I learned to draw very complex shapes and figures with my eyes closed as well as with my eyes open. So you couldn't tell the difference, right? Mm-hmm. And the only way I could do that was through training my brain through incredible sensory feedback. And we've used it now with a lot of different people, and it's a very, very effective exercise. So now I do know where the left side of my body is. I can register pain, and I can play sports, and I don't bump into things. Like before, if I was walking through a door, I'd as likely walk through the middle of the door as bump onto the side of the door, like I'd bump the side of my body. So, if you see somebody that's awkward physically, it could be that difficulty, and we have a program for it. And the emotional piece that you talk about, we have programs for the person that you meet that can't read nonverbal cues, right? So they're awkward socially. The same idea is, we're talking about learning from your mistakes to solve a problem. Well, there's part of your brain that learns from social mistakes by reading the cues. So, you walk into a room and, you go over and talk to somebody and they're frowning, or it's very clear from their facial expression that they want you to go away. Well, someone with that difficulty doesn't interpret that information, or they don't perceive that information. So they'll continue to interact, and they can't learn from the feedback of other people because they don't perceive or interpret that feedback. And we have a program for that. And again, the idea is we're improving that part of the brain. We're not teaching strategies. Oh, if the person has a frown, maybe they're not happy, so maybe do something different. Because the problem with strategies there is the person, if they can't read and interpret, they don't know when to apply the strategy. So we change the brain's ability to be able to read, to interpret, and change the strategy. Someone that's a good negotiator, like the people that are negotiating, have to be strong in that ability, because in a good negotiation, you're reading the nonverbal cues of the team or the person you're negotiating with to modify your behavior to try to get the outcome that you want to get, right? So it's really critical. And some people say, oh, does it have any relevance to school? Well, in school, having good social relations, good peer relations, but also the teacher communicates a great deal nonverbally. Like a lot of the teachers, are you doing a good job, not a good job? A lot of that is nonverbal. And so if the student can't perceive that and read it, then they struggle in understanding the expectations of their teachers. So really, and that's a right hemisphere function. So they're all important. There's no part of the brain, there's that people have that statement, oh, we only use 10% of our brain. I guarantee you, over the course of the day, you use every part of your brain. And if there's any part that's underperforming, it will have an impact. Like, the brain wasn't designed for us only to use 10%. It's one of these kind of absurd myths that we hear. So every single part of our brain is critical and important in terms of the function that it's designed to do. And, I meet adults that maybe have a couple of areas that aren't, at the same level they'd ideally like, but it's not sufficient to really interfere with their functioning. Like maybe they're not good with languages, so they're okay with that, right? Like, so they're never going to be a linguist, but it hasn't impacted them from being able to do what they want to do. Whereas the students where there's a learning difficulty, what happens is what I call a cognitive load. It's a number of critical areas come together to make certain aspects of learning really, really challenging. And that's, we can enhance the individual that maybe only has one or two and would like to do that. But those individuals with the learning difficulties, are going to be significantly marginalized or have a struggle throughout their life if those aren't addressed. So I think that's that was my experience, right? I was one of those students, and that's why I love visiting the students, because I was one of them, right? We speak the same language. Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. Barbara, maybe to wrap up the podcast, can you give us some resources that you'd recommend if people want to check out maybe your homepage, the programs that you offer, maybe some book recommendations when it comes to neuroplasticity?
Yes. So there are two books on our website that I didn't write. Howard Eaton, who lives in Vancouver, wrote on the work, and he kindly has made them as free downloadable podcasts. One's called Brain School and one's called Brain Pioneer. And really, the Brain Pioneer was more written for older students, but it's a really good summary of neuroplasticity, neuroscience, and of this work. Brain School is more written for academics and for educators and talks about the work. But given that they're free downloads, well written, great material, I would highly recommend those. And they're on our website, which is arrowsmithschool.org or arrowsmithprogram.ca. You can get there both ways. And there's my TED Talk that kind of talks about this work. There's all of the research that's been done on this work for people that are research geeks that like to look at research. I welcome you to go in and see what we're seeing in the brains of students with learning difficulties, and then the transformation. I'm trying to think what else is on. And there's a number of videos of both students, parents, and adults talking about their experience with the work, which are really, really interesting to listen to. And there's a cognitive questionnaire that's free. I think I mentioned it, that is on the website that you can go in and answer the questions, and then it will give you a report based on your responses as to what may be some challenges that you might be having cognitively. So, and if somebody's interested after they've done that questionnaire, they can reach out and have a conversation with somebody in my organization. And also there are links to organizations around the world if there's one in a better time zone than us. So, yeah, I'd encourage you, to read the books, look at the videos, look at the research, and try out that questionnaire. And then if you want to follow up, come have a conversation.
Excellent, Barbara. Very cool. Longer than I expected, to be honest, but I learned a lot for sure. I hope the audience does as well, and hope to see you soon, maybe in the second episode. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.